It's so great to see everyone. Just before we begin, I just want to remind everyone to please mute yourselves, mute your microphone if you can. I wanted to begin by thanking our sponsors for the class this evening. First, to thank Harvey and Ann Brenner, who sponsored the class this evening in honor of Harvey's 55th bar mitzvah anniversary, and also to thank an anonymous co-sponsor of the classes this week, who simply just wanted to sponsor to be able to thank everyone who have been, servicing our community and keeping us going and successful during this time. We thank you dearly, whoever you are, and it's a testament to it's not just the rabbis, the staff, and the appointed lay leaders that have been keeping the shul running, but really each and every one of us who have been, volunteering and giving of themselves during this time, and also that have been following the guidelines and the directives from our governor, from our health advisors, and from our rabbis to keep each and every one of us safe. Deserves a thank you, and a thank you to those that come and join the classes, because it is the Torah that sustains us and keeps us going. So really a thank you to everyone in the community. Tonight we are going to discuss the character, the great decider. He really is all-encompassing of all of the great Ds, of great debates, great deciders, great decisions. And this is none other than the great Rabbi Shimon bar Yochai, whose yortzeit was Lag BaOmer, was yesterday.
In carrying out
Rabbi Shimon bar Yochai was an unbelievable character. We'll get to him shortly. The testament to how great Rabbi Shimon bar Yochai was is really a testament to how great he was those that went to be able to light a madura, to write an avuka, to light a bonfire at his kever, even though with everything going on, according to they got permission. The Biana Rebbe lit a bonfire with just a small group in attendance, because we couldn't have gone to Lag BaOmer without having a bonfire. And generally speaking, what happens in Meron, at the kever at Har Meron, on Lag BaOmer, is something that's unbelievable, where you have, close to, if not more than 100,000 Jews all go to dance, celebrate, and sing to celebrate and acknowledge the legacy of Rabbi Shimon bar Yochai, the great Tana, this amazing individual, and the legacy he left behind. And this amazing individual is who we are going to discuss tonight. And I really want to use Rabbi Shimon bar Yochai like we do always, where we take a character and we build up who this person was and put it into the context of going from Har Meron to Har Sinai, as we go from Lag BaOmer to Shavuos, to over the next couple of weeks, as we prepare for Shavuos, to use Reb Shimon bar Yochai, his character, his legacy, the great debates, decisions, and who he was, the great decider, he himself, as a springboard to prepare ourselves properly. My grandmother, Allah Shalom, was someone who, like many Sephardic Jews like her, was someone that was a firm believer in the teachings of Rabbi Shimon bar Yochai. And those teachings are the teachings, namely, of Kabbalah, that was something that in our family was something we were brought up with as something that's significant and something that's meaningful and something that we don't take lightly. And as a young girl in Israel, she emigrated to Israel from Libya in 49. So since then, she would go to Meron. I think, Dad, correct me if I'm wrong, it was 6 years in a row She went to Meron on Lag BaOmer, and then someone on the 6th year that she was there told her that if she comes next year, then she would have to make a great commitment. That according to Kabbalah, according to the teachings of Rabbi Shimon Bar Yochai, if you would go to his kever 7 years in a row, then you'd be stuck. You'd have to go every year after that. And that was a commitment she wouldn't be able to take on. So that was the last year that she went. And, she went because she was brought up with this understanding that the teachings of Rabbi Shimon Bar Yochai were something that's significant. My great-grandfather, Zecher Tzadik V'Kadosh Levracha, Chacham Amos Adiv, the last 7 years of his life after his wife had passed away, tragically, the last 7 years of his life, he spent under a talit, engrossed completely in the writings of the Zohar. He would tell his daughter, Sarah, my grandmother, to go and pick the Zohar off of a top shelf. It was a big white 1-volume Zohar that he would study from, just under a talit, my grandmother told me, totally engrossed in the Zohar. And it brings to mind, whenever I think about that story of my great-grandfather, it brings to mind really, how the Zohar came to be in the first place. Where did all of this Jewish mysticism, Kabbalah, and what really Kabbalah is, which we'll talk about probably next week, is really a framework of, what is the depths of the Torah, kind of like what's behind the scenes, where what we have is a revealed Torah, which is basically Torah that's practicable, Torah that's practical, and something that I can understand. It's something that has halacha attached to it. It serves as a guide, a practical guide to my life, which is compiled of the Mishnah, the Gemara, the Rambam, the Shulchan Aruch, and we've discussed this many times. But something that's a little bit less understood is kind of what's behind the scenes. What makes up the Torah? And I'm not talking about the mitzvos, but what even makes up a mitzvah itself? What is a mitzvah? How did God create the world? These questions is really what is made up in the Zohar. And I'm really just giving you the book jacket version of what the Zohar is. But the foundation of where the Zohar even came from is really goes back to who Reb Shimon Bar Yochai's teacher was. And now we have to go into first century Judaism. This is during the Second Temple period, right at the end of the Second Temple period. There was a group of Talmudic scholars, Tanaim, who went into what was called the Pardes. And this was a group of 4 Talmidei Chachamim, 4 Tanaim, that together as a group went to go study the depths of Jewish mysticism, really to understand the depths of God himself. And this was Rabbi Akiva, Ben Zoma, Ben Azai, and Acher. Acher was Elisha ben Avuya, who, because of what happened at the Pardes, totally went off the rails and rejected Judaism completely, and was later known as Acher, the other one. Wouldn't even refer to him by his real name. So what happened at the Pardes? So the Gemara in Chagiga tells us on Daf Yud Daled the following. The Gemara says that these 4 Talmidei Chachamim went into the Pardes, which technically means the orchard. And Rashi tells us right on the spot, they didn't just go for a spitzier to go hang out and go for a nature walk in the orchard. What did they do? They went to study the depths of Torah. When they came out, the following happened. Ben Azai died. He couldn't handle whatever he discovered. It was too much for him, and therefore it was at that moment he left the world. Ben Zoma, he was completely damaged. He went deranged from it. He was not able to function anymore as a normal person the way he once was. He was completely damaged by the experience of delving into the depths of God. Acher, we know what happened to him, that it totally had an effect on his spiritual well-being, to the point not necessarily his physical well-being like Ben Zoma, but his spiritual well-being. And the way that the Talmud describes that he left the Pardes and he started destroying things. That's what the way that the Talmud describes it. He started destroying things. Rabbi Akiva went into the Pardes in peace, says the Gemara, and left in peace, totally undamaged, and only gained something from the experience. Rabbi Akiva then passed down these teachings to his student, Rabbi Shimon bar Yochai. Rabbi Shimon bar Yochai was amongst the 5 students that survived after the terrible plague that took the lives of 24,000 students of Rabbi Akiva. And it is on Lag BaOmer that we celebrate the fact that Rabbi Akiva's students stopped dying. And we also celebrate the fact that it's Rabbi Shimon bar Yochai's Yurtzeit, who was one of the 5 students that survived and was able to take the Torah of Rabbi Akiva and build it after that destruction. During the Great Revolt against the Roman Empire that took place in really, all over Israel, there were, times where there was more activity. It was really essentially, when you look in the history books, one really long revolt. Some make the mistake that there were 2 revolts, a revolt that happened in the 1st century, and then a revolt that happened in the beginning of the 2nd century, the Bar Kokhba revolt. But it was really like 2 revolts, and Bar Kokhba really led at the end, and unfortunately it ended in tragedy. But right before the Second Temple was destroyed, around the year 66 or 67, the Jews began a revolt, and then it lasted about 65, 70 years, ending with the Bar Kokhba revolt, and unfortunately we did not succeed. During that time, Reb Shimon bar Yochai's Rebbe, Rabbi Akiva, was arrested, and we know he was among the 10 martyrs that we speak about, we refer to on Yom Kippur and Tisha B'Av. And because, Reb Shimon bar Yochai saw that he was in danger, so he went out in hiding, and he went into a cave. And he went there basically indefinitely. He took his son, Reb Elazar, and Reb Shimon bar Yochai and his son, Reb Elazar ben Reb Shimon, went into the cave. And together in that cave, they studied the depths, this like kind of a carbon copy of what took place in the Pardes, where for 12 years it happened to be. For 12 years, they studied the depths, really the depths of the Torah, all of the Sod, the foundation of the Torah, the foundation of God's, the way that God interacts with us in this world. That was all discussed in this cave, and it was during that time that he created the content of what was then published as the Zohar. By the way, I should mention, it's pretty clear, we now know that Reb Shimon bar Yochai did not write the entire Zohar. Our tradition tells us he was basically the one that wrote the entire Zohar, but there are some parts of the Zohar that clearly could not have been written by Reb Shimon bar Yochai, because he refers to rabbis that were alive only after Reb Shimon bar Yochai passed away, that only came onto the scene posthumously. So then it couldn't have been that Reb Shimon bar Yochai was writing about them. He wasn't a Navi. He was an unbelievable Mikubal, but he wasn't a Navi. So, but for the most part, the Zohar, which is the basis of this foundational Torah, was written in the cave, in the experience with his son, Rebbe Elazar. During that time, there was a miracle. The Gemara tells us that they were sustained by nothing except for water and a carob tree that grew there miraculously. And during that time, that is all they lived on, just water and a carob tree. A question that we're going to come back to, by the way, is asked by the Ben Ishchai, Rabbi Yosef Chaim, Chacham Yosef Chaim from Baghdad, who wrote a book, the Ben Ishchai, a book on halacha. He has a book called Ben Yehoyada, where he elucidates the more mystical areas of the revealed Torah in the Gemara. He also has a book, a collection of responsa. He was the Rav of Baghdad. He was the chief rabbi of Baghdad, and he has a book collection of responsa addressing different questions. So someone asked him regarding this story of Reb Shimon bar Yochai, that if all he ate for 12 years straight was carob and water, so what did he do on Shabbos? What did he do at the Pesach Seder? If he didn't have challah for lechem mishnah, he didn't have his shalosh seudos, he didn't have his full Shabbos meals. In fact, the question's made even stronger, says the Ben Ish Chai. Why? Because Reb Shimon Bar Yochai in the Zohar himself, he makes testimony. He says this in Parshas Hazinu in the Zohar. He makes testimony that he never missed one of the 3 meals of Shabbos, the Shalosh Seudos. He didn't miss one of those meals his entire life. What do you mean? There were 12 years straight that all you ate was carob and water. What'd you make Kiddush on? What did you have for your Lechem Mishnah, your 2 loaves? And the Zohar himself refers to the fact that there's a necessity of having Lechem Mishnah. What did you do on Pesach? Why didn't you have your matzah, your maror? So it's a question we're going to come back to soon. So he was there for 12 years. What happened after 12 years? So I want to share with you this Gemara. Take a look at your screens. I'm going to pull it up on the screen right now. Can you see what I see? I'll take the silence, even though you're muted, as a yes. So the Marty, yeah, it's good. Give me a thumbs up, Marty. Okay, great. Can you see the blue over here?
Yes.
Okay, perfect. The Gemara says the following. What happened after these 12 years? Nafku, they left. Chazu inshi, so the 2 of them walked out, and they now go back into the regular world. There's no longer a threat to them. By the way, how did they know that there was no longer a threat? Because the Gemara says that Eliyahu Hanavi came and revealed himself to them, saying that there's no longer a threat anymore. So you're safe to go. So they left. Nafku chazu inshi. They then saw people that saw society. The kakarvi vizari, that were vizrai, that they were doing agricultural work. They were doing work in the field. Amar. So Reb Shimon says, Manichem chai olam ve'oskin b'chai isha, that he was so appalled by this behavior that how could it be that they're out there farming and doing this physical labor? It's just such a waste. How could they leave the chai olam, the oskim b'chai isha? How could they leave a connection of God in order to go work in the field? Kol makom shenotin enehen. Then look what the Gemara says, that wherever they then looked, miyad nisraf, then immediately whatever they looked at burnt down. So if they looked at someone harvesting their crop, the crop that they looked at burned to the ground. If they saw a vineyard, the vineyard engulfed in flames and burnt to the ground. That they were on this like spiritual level that was so high to the point that, number one, they couldn't understand how people are living in this completely materialistic world, farming, chas v'shalom. How could they be doing that? To the point that it bothered their spiritual essence so much that when they glanced at it, it burned to the ground. Yatzta baskol, then a heavenly voice came out, the Amra, and it said, Lahem, lahachrev olami yitzatem. God says, what, you left the cave in order so that you can destroy my world? Chizru l'marachtem, go back into your cave. Hadar va'azal, they went back. Isru tresar yarchei shata, they went back for another 12 months. Okay. So we have to right away, just off the bat, before we get to the next part of the story, we have to ask, what is it that Rabbi Akiva went through, that Reb Shimon Bar Yochai went through with his son Rabbi Elazar in the cave, that made the experience of seeing people farming something that was so unsettling to the point that it caused destruction. And I learned in yeshiva, right? And I'm not, a great Talmud Chacham. I know maybe a little bit. I'm nowhere near the dirt under the fingernail of Reb Shimon Bar Yochai. I'll be the first to admit it. But I didn't know that if you learn in yeshiva for a long time, you come out being able to burn things down with your eyes. We're describing like Cyclops from X-Men, right? Like, what does this mean that things automatically would just burn to the ground as soon as he glanced at it? What's the Gemara talking about? And let's continue the story. Maybe we'll shed some light. Nafku, fine. After They went back into the cave for another year. Now that's the 13th year that they were in the cave. Then another bas kol came out, another heavenly voice came out and said, "Okay, fine, now you can come back into the regular world." Nafku, they then came out again. Kol hecha dahavi machi Rebbe Lazar. So then Rebbe Lazar still was living in this very intense spiritual existence. So then whatever Rebbe Lazar would look at, the same thing happened. It would become destroyed. Havi masi Reb Shimon, but then Reb Shimon would revive it. So when Rebbe Lazar would look at the person harvesting their crop and would look at it and the crop would burn to the ground, Reb Shimon was able to revive it. And then when he saw the vineyard and the vineyard burned to the ground, Reb Shimon was able to revive it. Amar lo, Reb Shimon turns to his son, Rebbe Lazar, and he says, Bini, dai la'olam ani va'ata. Rebbe Lazar, don't worry. Relax, because the world is enough with just me and you. So again, we have to ask a question, which is, when Rebbe Lazar came back and Reb Shimon came back, so I understand Rebbe Lazar was still having a hard time. Whatever happened during that first 12 years, still Rebbe Lazar couldn't get it out of his system, but Reb Shimon was able to. But now Reb Shimon went from being the Cyclops X-Men to being someone who was able to revive these dead crops. Like, how is this now able to happen? Like, what happened now over this last year that didn't just make him someone that was able to be settled what was going on in the world, but was actually able to revive things? Then what's with this cryptic statement over here? That my son, dai la'olam ani va'ata, that this world, it's enough with just me and you. And because Reb Shimon said that to his son Rebbe Lazar, it's kind of like, this whole back and forth of, at first Reb Shimon is intolerant of what's going on in the world, and then he takes on a certain tolerance to the way that people are more materialistic in the world than maybe he is, that he understands it's more important to be committing yourself to completely spiritual pursuits. But looking out into the world, okay, they'll do what they do, but is that really tolerance? I mean, he's tolerating it, but he's teaching his son basically that listen, at least there's two people in the world that get it. Okay, what they do, but at least there's two people in the world that get it, me and you. And that's enough. Let's see the next part of the story. Tanya demali shapsa. Chaza husaba tehave nukit trey madani asa. So then it was a Friday afternoon. They're walking on the road. I don't know if this was the same day. This was a number of days, weeks, maybe years later. Okay, they're walking on the road and they see a certain individual, an elderly man, who is running down the road, and he's holding two bundles of hadassim, two bundles of the myrtle branch that has a sweet smell, a beautiful fragrant smell that we use for our daled minim on Sukkot, which for Shabbos apparently was a very honorable thing to do. By the way, Sephardic Jews still to this day will make sure that they have hadassim on Shabbos. It's a custom. I don't know if my great grandfather had such a custom. Dad, you could speak to that if your grandfather, your Saba, had the custom of having hadassim in his house on Shabbos. But it is, did he?
I'm sorry, I don't remember.
You don't remember? It's a custom that many Sephardic Jews have. So he sees this individual running down the road with his hadassim in order to honor Shabbos with them. V'rahit, he's running bin hashmashos because it's Friday afternoon and he needs to catch Shabbos. Amrule, they stop him. Rebbe Lazar and Reb Shimon, father and son, stop this individual. Amrule, they say to him, honey, these things, these myrtle branches, these hadassim that you're holding, lama lecha, why are you carrying these things? Amrulahu, he says to them, lekavod Shabbos. It's for Shabbos purposes, because I want to beautify my house for Shabbos. V'tiski lecha bechad. So they say to him, hold on one second. If wouldn't it be just good enough to have one bundle of hadassim? Why do you need to have two bundles of hadassim? Chad keneged zachar, v'chad keneged shamor. One of them says this man is for Zachor es Yom HaShabbos L'Kadsho, to remember, to sanctify the Holy Shabbos, v'chad keneged shamor, and one represents the fact that the Torah tells us there's also a prohibition of violating the Shabbos. One's for Zachor, one's for one's for shamor. That's why I have these two bundles. Amar lo lebrei, Reb Shimon Bar Yochai turns to his son and he says, Chazi, don't you see, Kama chavivin mitzvahs al Yisrael, how much the Jewish people love and appreciate the mitzvos of Hashem. Yasiv da'atehen, and then they lived happily ever after. End of story of Reb Shimon and Rebbe Elazar. So what we have to ask in the third part of the story is, what happened with this fellow coming down the road that totally changed their perspective? That now they're able to live in this world in a peaceful manner. They lived happily ever after. What happened over here with this fellow? That's question number one. Question number two is, as soon as the individual told them that, oh, it's L'Kavod Shabbos, why did they then follow up with, well, you should just, then all you need is one? Right away they should have said, you see how great the mitzvos are for the Jewish people? And that should have been enough to give them a peace of mind. Why is it only once the individual said, oh, one is keneged zachar, one's keneged shamar, one is for shamar, one's for zachar, these two aspects of Shabbos, that it's only at that point that they were appeased and that they were able to live normal lives after that, relatively normal lives. What happened in this third part of the story? So again, going back, let's review. The story goes like this. They were sitting in the cave for 12 years. They were learning the depths of the Torah in a very intense way. They come out after 12 years. They can't imagine the fact that people are engaged in such materialism. Everything they see turns to ash. They go back for another year because God says, please don't destroy my world. They go back for a year. After a year, they come out. Rebbe Elazar is still having a very hard time with this, but Reb Shimon teaches, quote unquote, tolerance to his son by saying, listen, they'll do what they do. At least thank God in the world is me and you. And he was able to put out the fires, not just put out the fires that his son started, but actually was able to rebuild the things that were burnt down. They then, after some time later, are walking down the road. They see this individual with the Hadassim, and the individual teaches them the importance of beautifying Shabbos with not just one Hadas, but two Hadassim, and through that, they were able to live relatively normal lives, and they lived happily ever after. What is going on in this story? Why is it that Rebbe Elazar and Reb Shimon had such a hard time? Then after that, Reb Shimon is able to build things up again, but Rebbe Elazar is still having a hard time. He's quote-unquote tolerant, but then at the end of the story, what's going on with this fellow and the Hadassim and Zachor and Shamar? So I think we could suggest that these three parts of the story are really representing three stages of spiritual development. And these three stages of spiritual development that Reb Shimon, and through Reb Shimon, his son Rebbe Elazar, went through, have become the model for us to emulate as to how we are supposed to put ourselves on the trajectory of living wholesome spiritual lives. What are these three stages? The first stage is when someone becomes so engrossed, so enveloped, so taken by spiritual pursuits, there's only one thing they have on their mind. There's only one thing that they can understand, which is how unbelievably important it is to live in a spiritual world. You ask someone who, for the first time in their life, was able to learn a Tosfot in Shas for the first time in their life and really understand it. And they worked at it, and they spent time, they spent hours in yeshiva trying to understand what Tosfos has to say on a Gemara. You ask them, they'll tell you that at that moment, they never saw life in a more clear way. I'll give you an example. Rabbi Chanan Wasserman was approached by an individual in Baranovich, one of his students, and was approached because he had a very difficult question of maybe a difficult family issue. I don't remember the details exactly of the story, but it's recorded by Reb Shlomo Lorenz. Reb Shlomo Lorenz was a Knesset member representing the Haredi party. He had a seat representing Degel HaTorah in the Knesset, and he had close relationships with all of these Gedolei Yisrael. And he tells a story, a first-hand account of this experience with Rabbi Chanan Wasserman. And Rabbi Chanan Wasserman was approached by one of his students, asking him a question. It was a very difficult question, looking for his advice. He tells the student, come back to me in a couple hours and I should be able to give you a proper response. Rabbi Shlomo Lorenz is witnessing this. The student leaves, and while the student is gone, Rabbi Chanan Wasserman pulls out a Mishnayos Ohalos, which is one of the areas of the Mishnayos that are very difficult to understand, in the area of Tumah and Tahara, how Tumah is transferred, how impurity is transferred between locations within real estate, how the building is structured. And it's a very detailed and really almost like esoteric in a sense. And it takes tremendous concentration to understand the Mishnayos of Olos. He started engaging in the study of Mishnayos Olos for a complete 2 hours straight. Afterwards, the student comes back into his study and asks his Rebbe again, asks Rabbi Chanan, maybe you have an answer for me now in terms of what I should do. Rabbi Chanan looks at him and he gives him the best possible eitzah, the best possible piece of advice that this student needed at that particular time. The student then leaves, and Rav Shlomo Lorenz looks at Rabbi Chanan Wasserman and asks him, he says, I don't understand. You weren't looking into the specific question that this individual asked. You didn't take these 2 hours to contemplate the question. You spent these 2 hours learning Mishnayos Olos. But somehow, over these last 2 hours, you went from being completely confused on the matter to giving a most clear and decisive piece of advice. What happened over the last couple hours? Rabbi Chanan Wasserman said, I was engaged with God. I was looking to get advice from God. How else am I supposed to? I learn Torah. I go to the depths of Torah. You come out when you go through the depths of Torah with complete transparency as to what God is looking for us in this world. Reb Shimon bar Yochai and his son Rebbe Lazar spent 12 years working on what would become the Zohar. If this applies to someone like myself, or a yeshiva guy, a Rosh Yeshiva, Rabbi Chanan Wasserman, certainly this applies to what happened to Reb Shimon bar Yochai and his son Rebbe Lazar in the cave. During that time, they were so enveloped and engrossed in spiritual pursuits, they didn't know how to live back in this world. They looked out at the rest of the world, and whatever they saw as completely just materialism. How could you engage in such a thing? And therefore, whether it was literally burnt down by their spiritual being, or maybe it was metaphorically burnt down from when they looked at it, because it was something that in their eyes was just ash. It was just meaningless. When they saw people farming and engaged in agricultural pursuits, they go, why? So it was something in their eyes that became like ash. God says, you're destroying the world. With that kind of an outlook, you're not going to be able to live in this world, and therefore you're going to create destruction. Go back to the cave for another year. Figure out how to live back in this world. So they did. They went back for a year. Rebbe Lazar wasn't able to necessarily grasp it completely, but Reb Shimon was, and Reb Shimon goes back into the world and starts putting out the fires of Rebbe Lazar, meaning he starts giving his son the proper perspective, that while you and I, thank God, dai ba'olam hazeh ani v'ata, great that in this world there's me and you, and therefore we understand what God really wants from us, these spiritual pursuits, but we have to be quote-unquote tolerant of the fact that not everyone gets it until they met the individual running on the road. The individual running on the road, holding his 2 hadassim, running for Shabbos. They ask him, what are you doing with these things? Meaning, what are you doing with these material things? It's no different than the grapes. It's no different than the corn. You're carrying these branches. Okay, they have a sweet smell. Who cares? We lived the last 12 years on carob and water. You think you really need these things? What are you doing holding hadassim? Stop. Put it down. Wake up. Smell the coffee. God wants you to engage in spiritual pursuits, not with hadassim. So the fellow says, no, it's the covered Shabbos. So they say to him, hold on one second. The covered Shabbos. So if it's the covered Shabbos, Shabbos is a spiritual pursuit. So what are you doing with two things? You just have one. Meaning, why do you need to engage with two things on Shabbos? Why do you need to engage with physical pursuits on Shabbos? Just engage with spiritual pursuits on Shabbos. The last 12 months we did. The last 12 years before that we did. For the last 13 years, we've been engaged with only spiritual pursuits, even on Shabbos. Meaning, we were able to fulfill our mitzvah of the 3 meals on Shabbos just with spiritual pursuits. Meaning, they were satiated. They were able to give honor to the Shabbos through their spiritual pursuits. That answers, by the way, the question of the Ben Ish Chai. This is the answer he gives, that during those 12 years, they had their 3 meals, but their 3 meals were not comprised of chicken, roast, and tuna and egg salad. Their 3 meals were comprised of lechem mishnah, of spiritual Torah, Zohar pursuits. So they say to him, you only need one thing. You don't need 2 things. You need spirituality. You don't need physicality. So the fellow responds and he says, no, chad keneged shamar v'chad keneged zachar, that I need 2 things. I need to be able to engage with God through the area of shamor. What's shamor? Shamor is observing the Shabbos, abstaining from materialism, abstaining from creativity, abstaining from labor, only engaged with God. But then there's also Zachar. What's Zachar? Zachar is Yom HaShabbos L'Kadsho. Ein Kiddush Ela B'Makom Seuda, the Gemara tells us. How are we supposed to sanctify Shabbos? The Gemara tells us through wine and over a meal. That we take the material things in this world, we take our food, the thing that is the most basic human need, the need to eat, and we elevate it. We take wine, which is just something that could be potentially used for destruction, of totally clouding the way you view the world through its alcohol and uplifting it through Kiddush. It's not just Shamor, Reb Shimon, but it's also Zachar. It's also being able to uplift the world. That is when Reb Shimon Bar Yochai was able to live in this world. That is when he looked at his son and he said, Chaviva mitzvahs HaYisrael. Now I understand that the Jewish people really get the mitzvos. You're right. In this perfect, ideal Zohar world, all you need is spirituality. Which is why, by the way, it's dangerous to engage in the Zohar and to engage in Kabbalah. But we'll get to that next week. There is a place where there's only spirituality, and that's the place of the cave, of the Zohar, of Reb Shimon. But there's an ideal level in this world as well, of being able to uplift the physical world into a spiritual world. There's an amazing, amazing medrash. The Medrash tells us that Shabbos went over to God. Shabbos herself went to Hashem and started complaining. This is brought down in the Das Zikanim in Parshas Pinchas, in Chamishi of Pinchas, where the Torah is describing the karbanos of Shabbos. So the Das Zikanim of Bali Atosos bring down a Medrash where Shabbos herself goes over to God and says, God, listen, what's the deal? My karban musaf, my additional offering that's brought on Shabbos is smaller than the other additional offerings. It's only 2 lambs. It's very small. It's 2 portions of the meal offering. It's small. Whereas Rosh Chodesh has 7 of this and 3 of that. And you look at Sukkot. Sukkot has 70 karbanos that are brought in. These are huge karbanos. But Shabbos says, listen, you told me I'm the holiest day of the week, and not only the holiest day of the week, but of the entire calendar. Shabbos is the holiest day. Then why is it that I only have these 2 measly karbanos that are brought, these 2 small lambs that are brought? I should have more that's brought on me. God looks at Shabbos and says to Shabbos, you got it wrong. You have the greatest of all of the offerings because yours are doubled. What does that mean? So the Das Zakanim builds off of that to say, because everything on Shabbos is doubled, that your carbon is doubled. It's 2. During the week, we bring 1 lamb. On Shabbos, we bring double. We bring 2. That's what the Musaf offering is. And the Das Zakanim goes through a whole list, pointing out how on Shabbos, things are doubled. Right away, we point out from our Gemara. What do we just remind ourselves of? That there's Shamor and Zachar. There's 2 aspects of Shabbos. There is Kavod and Oneg. There's honoring the Shabbos and enjoying from Shabbos. Another double. What do we have on Shabbos? Lechem Mishnah. 2 loaves, not just 1, 2 loaves. That on Shabbos, the man fell with a double portion. Shabbos is doubled. The Torah, when describing the punishment that one would receive for violating Shabbos, what does it say? Mos yumas. A double language of putting the person to death. On Shabbos, what's the song of the day of Shabbos? Mizmor Shir Liyom HaShabbos. Mizmor Shir. It's a psalm and a song. Double again. Shabbos, everything is double. What's this double nature of Shabbos? So the Gur Aryeh, the Maharal Miprag, which is my grandfather's lineage is Prague and Czechoslovakia. So we're bringing both in. The Gur Aryeh says the following. He says that because Shabbos represents the day where we take the physical aspect of this world and bring it into the spiritual realm, which is why on Shabbos we have a neshama yesera. We have this additional neshama, and we have a mitzvah of oneg also. Now, how could that be? You have this additional soul, so therefore you should spend more of your time in spiritual pursuits. But what do we do on Shabbos? We have a big meal. Why? Because on Shabbos, it has this double nature to it. It's taking the physical and lifting it to the spiritual. It's uplifting this world. It's not just 1 hadas, it's 2 hadasim. It's not just spiritual, it's taking the physical and lifting it to the spiritual realm. That's why there is, says the Maharal, there is an Isser Malacha, there's a prohibition of engaging in work on Shabbos, but we also call Shabbos an Ein Olam Haba, that Shabbos has aspects of it that are both physical and spiritual, because that is what Shabbos is all about. When we engage in Shabbos in that kind of way, so then Shabbos, as the pasuk refers to in Parshas Bahaloscha, in Perek Yud of Sefer Bamidbar, the Torah refers to Shabbos as B'yom Simchatchem, that on your happy days. There's no mitzvah of Simcha on Shabbos. There's a mitzvah of being of enjoying Shabbos, of oneg. There's no mitzvah of Simcha on Shabbos. So the Slonim Rebbe, the Nesiva Shalom, says, why is Shabbos referred to as Yom Simchatchem? Because if you are able to engage with Shabbos in this way, by taking the physical world and uplifting it to a spiritual realm, that is the key to living a life as Shimon Bar Yochai lived, as the Gemara said, Yativ Datehu, he lived a satisfied life, a happy life, because he was able to live in both the spiritual world while engaged in the physical world, to be able to lift the physical world to that spiritual world. I think then it's no coincidence why the song about Reb Shimon Bar Yochai, the song is called Bar Yochai, is sang on Shabbos. You go walk into a Sephardic home on Shabbos, a song that you are guaranteed to hear them singing is Bar Yochai. Bar Yochai is about the story of Reb Shimon. Why are we reading that on Shabbos? Because this is what Reb Shimon represents. Reb Shimon represents the model of going through these different stages of your spiritual growth, where you have to first engage in the spirituality to understand God. Once you do that, go back into the physical world. See how you could relate to it. And it might take some time, but eventually the goal is to be able to take your spirituality, apply it to the physical world, and then uplift it. And through that, you live tremendous life. It's specifically on Shabbos that we then engage again with Bar Yochai, and we sing Bar Yochai Nimshachta Ashrecha Shemin Saso Michaverecha. The way the song ends is talking about how anyone who takes the teachings of Bar Yochai is called Ashrecha, is called someone who has gained success in this world, someone who has accomplished their goal of being able to live a physical world but one that is laced with spirituality, because that is our goal in this world. This is who we celebrated on Lag BaOmer. And this is who, over the next couple of weeks, as we go from Meron, as we go from celebrating this legacy of Rabbi Shimon Bar Yochai, we then take it into Shavuos. We build from there. Now it's time to move into Shavuos. This is how we prepare for Kabbalah Satorah, because we're about to enter into the cave again. We're about to go straight back to where Rabbi Shimon came from. We're about to go and accept the Torah, and then take that Torah and go back into the rest of the world with it. And it's during this period where we have to be contemplating the life, the legacy, the lessons of Rabbi Shimon Bar Yochai. Okay, we'll stop here. Let me unmute everybody. I'm going to stay on for a couple more minutes. If anyone has an